In 1788, the British claimed sovereignty and ownership over the entire Australian mainland. Aboriginal people had been living on the land for more than 40,000 years. It was thought that the Aboriginal people were nomads and had no systems of law, social organisation and property rights. The intention of the British was to claim the continent without the need for treaty or compensation. Legally, it was held to be terra nullius, a land belonging to no one. Two prominent Aboriginal community members, Gary Murray and Robbie Thorpe, speak out about activism. Their views have been considered radical by mainstream Australia, but their stories have national significance, and they are still fighting for the rights of Aboriginal Australia. This is their story.
All Aboriginal people who call themselves Aboriginal people, that fight starts when you're born in this country. If you know what's happening, you're born into the fight.
We are the most dispossessed, most impacted on, most dispersed of any group in Australia. This is the southeast, of course, including New South Wales to a certain extent, and Tasmania. Wurraka Mulu, which is Wamba word for messenger from the Murray River, is my traditional name, given to me by my father, John Stewart Murray, and my non-Indigenous name is Gary Murray. I'm from the Murray River, the Loddon and the Wimmera River areas. In particular, we're from Wiradjuri, which is Bogan River, and Judaroa, which is in the Alps of Victoria and also New South Wales. Yorta Yorta country, of course, land of the long-necked turtle, and Barapparap, platypus people, Wamba Wamba, which is the red-tailed black cocky, which is a totem for the Wamba people, and then, of course, the Crow people, Jar Jar Wurrung in central Victoria, and the Pelican people at Yupagok and Wirragaya.
My name's Robbie Thorpe. My father comes from Lake Torres, East Gippsland, also known as Crowatatangalang. My mother comes from, her mother comes from Framlingham, from the country down there called Japwarung. It's important to realise what happened to the Aboriginal people of Victoria. They were reduced to less than 1,000 people by 1920. Many of those colonised refugees ended up in places like Fitzroy, which was basically a ghetto. A lot of criminals in that area. It was outside the central business district, of which Aboriginal people weren't really allowed to be enter, or there was a curfew.
I was born in Barrow on the island, and Barrow about 4.5 hours from here. And myself and my older brother and older sister and younger brother were all born there. We got wiped out by the floods in 1957 and we moved to Melbourne. And Mum, by that time, had enough of Barrow and the island because Dad used to be a rabbiter and a fencer, so he'd be out for long periods of time and Mum would be home in a tent. And she was sick of the big red dust storms and the drop-dead sparrow heat. It used to be about 52-degree heat them days, and the sparrows would just drop out of the sky from the heat, thirst and whatnot. Barrow muddy country. We're not muddy people. It's not our country, but a lot of people went across there to escape, colonial life and, the sort of things that were happening to Aboriginal people back then in the those 1930s, 40s, 50s.
My mother was born during the Depression years and I grew up around Fitzroy, married my father probably about 1950. When they separated in 1970, we came to Melbourne. Mum had 7 kids in tow and we ended up living with my grandmother and her partner in a one-bedroom house in Rathdown Street, Carlton. So, sort of tough beginnings, but Mum got involved with Aboriginal politics, the Aboriginal Health Service and the idea of community control, self-determination and all those sorts of things. Pioneering organisations, preventative medicine, holistic ideas and free legal, free dental, women's refuge, child care agencies. Pioneered them Aboriginal people under the idea of community control, self-determination. And those organisations came out of places like Fitzroy and Redfern, where there was nothing. And this is in spite of the government's fiduciary obligation and duty of care. They made us all wards of the state and had a duty of care in terms of our welfare. And they basically criminally neglected us, and to the point where there was genocide going on. Our people died in the streets, and we weren't accessing the places like hospitals even. So the need was there to create our own health service clinics in the communities, which we managed and controlled.
Mum is Nora Nichols, and she's the daughter of Howard Herbert Nichols, but was raised by Pastor Sir Doug Nichols.
Gary's grandfather, Sir Pastor Doug Nichols, was a leader in the Fitzroy community and dedicated much of his life to those in need of help. He became the pastor of the first Aboriginal Church of Christ in Australia.
Lady Gladys Nichols and Pastor Doug Nichols are probably the only two people in Australia where a statue's been dedicated to them, and that's in the Parliament Gardens there behind Parliament House in Melbourne now. You know, we've done a bit of a family tree of this thing. That was done in 99. If I rolled it out, it's probably about 12 metres long, and that's got about 9 of our ancestors listed across all those groups I mentioned. And I think everybody needs to do that. You need to know who your connection is for spiritual reasons, as well as, you know, the physicality of knowing that, you know, your ancestor came from that country can never be taken away from you. You can never be dispossessed of it.
Apart from my mother and grandmother, the most inspirational thing for me when I was young, I seen Lionel Rose win the world title, and made me so proud. He put our people on the map. I don't think people realise what he'd done for our people. He's just an incredible man, so honourable, and fantastic sportsman who came from a dirt floor and in a fringe dwelling camp. Such an incredible story, Lionel Rose. He inspired me so much and made me so proud I was a blackfella. I believe that Australia is still a crime scene in regards to its relationship with the Aboriginal people. There's no consent here. There's no treaty, and that means they've got no jurisdiction despite that. And we're not in the Constitution. Despite that, we fill their jails. There's a serious over-representation of incarceration. Our people spent generations in concentration camps or detention centres in this country. And we were the colonised refugees, forced assimilation. And they created the conditions with the intent to destroy this country, and still have it. That changes when you have a treaty. A treaty is a consensual document that creates a proper legal foundation, not this imposed things like terra nullius and the idea of native title, which I call naive title. Stay away from it, mob. It's no good, right? It's just more of the same. The Europeans or the invaders, the colonisers and trespassers got no right to make laws for our people. We're enlightened people. We don't need that backward, dark age colonised rubbish. We need to be recognised, and they need to act legally and honourably. And so that's why we need international scrutiny when we enter that process. This is the way we get our sovereignty recognised too. That's what our struggle's been all about.
Well, in Victoria, there's been about 3 or 4 settlements, and they don't compare to the Noongar claim, for example, or the Kimberley claims. Some of the worst settlements have been done here in Victoria, you know, and they amount to, for example, in simple economic terms, that Wampa groups offered $700 per head for each of the 11,000 Wampa people. Jar Jar Rungs offered $3,000 a head. And you compare that to Noongar claim, it's $35,000 per head. So why the difference? It's discrimination, clearly. It's got to start with the clans. It's the clans who have the rights. They have the right to sovereignty, they have the right to a treaty, they have the territory, they have the language and the customs and traditions, right? So you've got to start there. You can't start with some National Aboriginal Congress. It's got 8,000 people as members. You know, there's 600,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in this country. There's 37,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders living here in Victoria. There's about 4,000 TIs in that list. But you start with a clan and you ask them what they want, you know, and they're going to tell you the same thing probably. We want a quality of life, we want living standards, we want housing, we want employment, we want training, we want our culture back, we want our language, and so on and so on. And we want recognition about what happened to us, right? And once you've got the clans organised, obviously you've got to fight for the treaty aspect, the sovereignty stuff. You know, this is not new. It's happened in Canada, it's happened in New Zealand, it's happened in America, happened in you know, with the Sami people and what in Europe. So when is the Australian government and its people, white people, the people that come here, when are they going to wake up and do something about it, get rid of it? Why do we have to keep on handing it down as their heritage and our heritage? It's baggage. Get rid of it. It's bad baggage. Address the issues.
Australia's the only Commonwealth country without a treaty. There's 76 Commonwealth countries around the Empire. The only one that hasn't got a treaty is this one here, and it's a continent. Australia's a very resource-rich country. And, you know, this whole native title, which was on the back of terra nullius, the act of shame in which this country was based, all of its institutions, including the High Court, were based on terra nullius, was removed and replaced with something worse. Naive title. More white-fella legislation. Where was the recognition of Aboriginal law in those negotiations? I understand why the mob's sitting up there in Canberra trying to defend our sovereign rights. That's what it's about. That's what they went there in 1972 to do, explain that, stop the genocide, recognise our sovereignty and have a treaty.
All the things that happened to Aboriginal people over 230-odd years of the invasion is unjust. I think we've got to address those issues of dispossession and dispersal and deculturalisation and all the bad things that have happened to us and still happening to us. I think, you know, today, in contemporary terms, I suppose, you've got all these organisations around. In Victoria, we've got something like 200 corporations, associations and co-ops that provide different levels and standards of services in housing and welfare and health and everything else. Yet we have some major problems in this community and, you know, whether it's ICE and crime and all that sort of stuff, I wonder why we're getting all this money and we're not doing a job.
It's been a horrendous time for our people. We're forced to assimilate, and assimilation is the sort of a, you know, I think it's the worst form of genocide, being forced to become something that you really detest. And the whole time that we've been in this country, Europeans have been in this country, that's what they're trying to do to us, to absorb us into that. You know, we're not stray aliens. We've got culture, we've got identity, we've got a pre-existing law, precedent law, not recognised in Mabo, not anywhere. And it's sustainable, it's humane, and it created a pristine environment which our people lived happily for, you know, since the diprotodons were around here at least. And, you know, we lived happily and healthy, and people don't really know our story yet.
The path to reconciliation has been a long, hard struggle. Gary and Robbie, as well as many other true warriors, are dedicated to righting the wrongs of the past. This land did not belong to no one. This land is the legacy left behind by our ancestors. This land belongs to the Aboriginal people.
Yahweh, Duran Bunjalini, Burun Mundundarung, Japwarung, Crowatangalang. That's my name and address. When the police ask me, that's the address I give them. Burun Mundundarung, Duran Bunjalini, Crowatangalang, Japwarung. It's not my problem if the police can't understand the language of the law.